Hello and welcome to Castle of Horror, the show dedicated to horror movies and awesomeness. This week, we take a first look, one of two, because there's a lot here. A first look at the second season of the acclaimed Netflix series Stranger Things. If you haven't seen today's show, we're going to be talking about it from the perspective of horror fans who have seen it. So, warning, spoilers ahead. From Denver, Colorado, I'm your host, Jason Henderson, author of the upcoming Young Captain Nemo series from Fievel and Friends, Macmillan Books. With me from Austin is Tony Salvaggio, tech director at Rooster Teeth Studios, lead singer and bassist of the band Deserts of Mars, and lead guitarist of the band Rise from Fire, which has a brand new album out this month. Say hello, Tony.
Howdy.
Howdy. What's the name of the album?
Hidden. And
Hidden.
Rise from Fire. It's on
Rise
Bandcamp
from Fire.
and
Yeah.
CD Baby right now. And then it should be out everywhere. All the streaming things soon.
Very cool. I just got it. I've only listened to one track so far, which is of course the first track, which is "Die by the Sword," which I really love this song. I really love it. Okay. Also in Austin is Mr. Drew.
Why? Wait, are you going to mention why you're laughing about that song?
I think that would be déclassé to mention.
No.
To mention.
I think it's trivia. It's Castle of Horror trivia.
Okay. Let me think. Okay, so I did a comic book. I wrote a comic book called Sword of Dracula, which was basically G.I. Joe with vampires. And I love it. You know, it was a blast to write. Okay. Tony took that and turned it in. He created a theme song for the graphic novel Sword of Dracula. So if you go to Amazon and you go get Sword of Dracula, you have to imagine that if it were a movie, it would be opening with this song that Tony created and that Rain Knox sings as the title track of, or it's not the title track, it's the first track of Hidden, and it's called "Die by the Sword," and it's pretty cool. Yeah, yeah, live by the gun. So yeah, no, it's
By the
truly
way,
strange.
I listened to that song and I wrote it for a previous band, and then we redid it through a lot of change ups. I don't remember writing those lyrics at all. It's so weird because it works really well, and I don't know. I think they're cool, and I want to write more like that, but I don't remember how I was in the zone. I guess it's so strange. Every time I hear that, I'm like, I wrote that. That's actually kind of cool. Whoa, I don't remember. Yeah, it's just bizarre. But Rain sings it way better than I used to.
I mean, when you hear the song, you can just picture, like, Ronnie Van Helsing running up a hill with a machine gun and like shells just sort of raining. Like this,
so
just ching ching ching.
I do feel kind of bad that we're like, I didn't want to do too much self-promotion. Let's talk about Stranger Things. Yes. But thank you for humoring me on that.
Yeah, Hidden is the name of the album. Yeah. Okay. Also in Austin is Mr. Drew Edwards, editor-in-chief of horrormovies.net, writer for Rockabilly Online, and creator and writer of the one and only long-running comic Halloween Man, which also has a brand new issue out. I mean, all of you guys are just so incredibly prolific. Welcome back, Mr. Drew.
In honor of the belated Happy Halloween, I declare myself the artist formerly known as Catwolf tonight.
Oh yeah, nice.
Catwolf, that was beautiful. Okay, Catwolf. Yes, for some reason you were a Captain America werewolf, which I thought.
Well, Captain America was briefly a werewolf. In the 1990s, Mark Grunwald wrote it as part of his prolific run on Captain America towards the end, and it is so weird that it has become this oddly fondly remembered storyline. And for whatever reason, my wife thought it was the perfect Halloween costume, so we combined. So I was Catwolf for Halloween. It was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun.
Awesome. Okay, and finally, also in Denver, as always, color commentary from attorney Julia Guzman of Guzman Immigration of Denver. She's also a member of the improv a cappella vocal group In Harmony's Way. Say hello, Julia.
Hello, Julia.
Hello.
Sorry, I can't
okay.
Help it.
All right.
Usually he doesn't set it up for me that way, and then I'm like, oh yes. Or if he does, Drew's already done it.
Yes.
It's tempting. It's always tempting.
Yeah, right?
Every week.
The funny thing is, that's a vaudeville joke. In other words, that joke was an old joke by the time
Oh,
Gracie
it's
Allen
called
was using
classic.
it.
It's classic joke. It is a
Right.
True
classic.
classic never goes out of style. All
Exactly.
right.
Right.
Drew
Like
knows.
you're comparing
Oh yeah.
Say Goodnight Gracie to khakis, then, are you? Okay. All right.
No.
Khakis? No.
Khakis.
After I think after this year, khakis definitely are out of style.
That's hilarious.
All
We
right.
can retire them.
Okay, Stranger Things. Here's what we're going to be discussing: Stranger Things. Look, it's hard to imagine somebody would be listening to this episode who had not actually watched Stranger Things. But if you don't know, Stranger Things is an American science fiction horror web television series created, written, directed, and co-executive produced by the Duffer Brothers, and co-executive produced by Sean Levy. The first season, which we talked about last year, and you got to hear it. It had some recognizable stars in it, and Strider and David Harbour, who were actors that we saw a lot. Matthew Modine, who we saw a lot, and a lot of newcomers who were young actors: Finn Wolfhard, Millie Bobby Brown, Gaten Matarazzo, Kayla McLaughlin, Natalia Dyer, Charlie Heaton, Carabona. And they did a wonderful job. Okay, they're all back. But this season, we've added more characters. We're going to talk about it. We're going to split it up into two episodes because we don't want to give it short shrift. So we're going to talk about episodes 1 through 4, oh, and by the way, they introduced some new actors this time around, like Sean Astin and Paul Reiser. So we're going to talk about episodes 1 through 4 this time. We're going to come back next week and talk about 5 through 9. And wrap up our look at Stranger Things 2, which is what this season is called. It's not called season 2; it's called Stranger Things 2. So I think this is an order of opening thoughts that we haven't done in a while. Let's get our opening thoughts, and then I will come back and share with you a really cool review, because I promised our listeners that if they left us a review, I would read it, and I got a good one. But first, to open up, let's get our opening thoughts. And let's go Joya, Drew, Tony, and then if I have anything to say, I will say it. But I'm sure you brilliant guys will have taken care of it by then. So, Julia.
I, as did many people, I did binge watch the whole thing within 2 days. I didn't watch it all in one day, like I'm sure some people did, but I did watch it in 2 days. And I absolutely loved it. It's so much fun. I mean, everything from just the nostalgia, which I know we'll talk about, of the 80s, because I'm exactly the age that these kids will be at this point in the future. You know what I mean? Like I was their age in that year. And so it's just so great to see everything. And then also just that the acting is brilliant, the writing is brilliant, all the wonderful little allusions to things and homages to different movies and whatever. I just love it. I think it's a lot of fun, and I'm really excited to be talking about it.
Wonderful. Drew, what are your thoughts?
Well, it's funny. I went back and I kind of reviewed my thoughts about the first season, and one of the things I remember actually even saying on the podcast is that as much as I enjoyed season 1 of this, or Stranger Things 1, I guess as we now should be calling it, I would have been happy with it just being the one season, because it kind of had that perfect little John Carpenter stinger on the end of it. It felt very much like one of those movies. So I feel almost hypocritical saying this. I actually enjoyed this more than season 1. I feel like it was neat seeing all the characters and relationships involved. Mm-hmm. And I like the fact that this, and I'm sure we'll get more into this next week, but I like the fact that this was kind of aliens to the first season's Alien. And I just really, and of course it had copious amounts of references to Ghostbusters, so how would I not love this?
That's right, you love Ghostbusters.
Hello?
Yeah.
Did we lose you?
Are you there? Okay, we lost the last part of that sentence. Okay.
I said it had copious amounts of references to Ghostbusters. How could I not love it?
Yeah, because I remember that you said you loved Ghostbusters the most of all.
Oh wait, but remind me. Okay, you said it had a Carpenter-like stinger at the end of season 1. Remind us what that was.
Well, it ended with first of all the sheriff seemingly taking care of Eleven, but also Will, the boy that had been lost in the alternate reality, like vomiting up these sort of weird slugs. and not being as okay as you would like him to be. And that just seemed very much like it would be the end of a John Carpenter movie, which is one of the
Sure.
things the series heavily references is the films of John Carpenter. So there was a completeness to that I really enjoyed, but this really comes back and builds on it. And I particularly liked the evolution of a lot of the older characters who in the first season feel very much like teenagers that would be in a slasher movie from the 1980s, which is no doubt deliberate. But in this season, we really get to see them grow into beyond just archetypes. They become fully realized characters.
I agree with that. I agree with that a lot, and that'll be something that we can make close reference to when we talk about a very strange episode that comes later in the season that we'll talk about next week. So yes, excellent point. All right, Tony, what are your thoughts?
I liked it a lot, and I actually found the tonal shift really interesting. That it's in some ways more horror than the first season. And a little, it's weird. It has this weird dichotomy of much more nostalgia, but also, I think, a little bit more measured. Although there are still huge rip-offs. We can get to that later. But or homages, whatever you want to call it. But I really dig it. I didn't know if I was going to be able to catch it all up because everything's been so crazy lately. And we started watching it. And Rain was like, okay, next episode. We ended up spreading it out over 2 days as well. But I really enjoyed it. All the arcade and Dungeons and Dragons references were great because that's definitely, these are the kids that I would have been. I don't know if I would have been part of the group, but probably these are my people of that era. Definitely.
Sure.
Only there wasn't really a group of us. There was only maybe one or two or three, because it was super rural where I was living at the time.
Beautiful. I kind of have very little to add to that other than I did find myself enjoying this a lot. I felt two things. I really enjoyed seeing the characters sort of pair off and move apart, so and move together, so that you had a couple of really surprising pair ups, like Steve, who was very much kind of a wavering bully in the first season. In this season, is kind of maturing, and at the same time he becomes a mentor to Dustin, and that's the coolest. It's really neat to see these two characters sort of buddy up. That was unusual. On the other hand, just to give a preview of what I thought, I kind of felt like the story keeps some of the characters apart too much. I don't quite, I wish that weren't the case. But it's wonderful. But in many ways, I feel like we're missing a lot of character interaction that we could have had if they had moved various characters together. And second, I really want to talk before we're done about the cultural significance of this show and what I would call the problem of binge watching, and what Drew is saying is me confusing binge watching with the problem of serialized storytelling. Both of those things
Drew
are
would
important.
question whether it's a problem at all.
And Drew, right? So that's a
I
preview
think
of that.
binge watching, whether you like it or not, is here to stay, and I will get into that when we have the discussion.
No, it can be here to stay. I mean, I can weep for the culture, even if there's, even if it's.
This is a whole debate, and I'm holding back because I've been preparing for this over our email exchanges. But I will destroy you later, respectfully.
Yeah. We'll just think about that later. Okay. But first, before we go on, I just wanted to share. Oftentimes at the end of the show, I say a whole bunch of things. I leave out all of the legal mumbo jumbo that I probably should share, and instead, what I usually say is go ahead and leave us a review on iTunes. It really helps people find the show, and it does. That's a big deal. Anyway, we had a new review that I wanted to share. This is from Dallas Dotch. it came across about a week or so ago, and it says, one of the most entertaining podcasts out there. I discovered the Castle of Horror podcast about a year or so ago. It very quickly became part of my driving habit every morning and afternoon on the way to and from work. It is what's playing in my vehicle, always entertaining, enjoyable, and often funny. Keep up the great work, guys. Bring on more Universal horror and some 50s schlock. Listen, this is a man after my own heart if you want some more 50s schlock.
Well,
So
that's very nice. That's
that
very nice to say.
that that was very, very, very nice. So I just wanted to, if you leave us a review, we will read it. Tony, I interrupted you. I'm sorry.
No, I just said thank you. That was really
Yeah.
awesome.
It was a nice thing to say, and I like the fact that he talks about Universal horror, because I still think it's a crime that we have not done the Lugosi Dracula or its Spanish counterpart.
There are so many things we haven't done. We haven't done a Cronenberg series. We haven't done Lugosi Dracula.
Oh, we did.
We haven't really done a. Yeah, I mean, we will. We've
I-
there is still so much to do.
No, but I thought we did a few Cronenberg movies, didn't we? Oh, well, anyway.
Oh.
Okay, so
We did a
moving on,
movie
though.
with Cronenberg in it because we did
Yeah.
Nightbreed, but we
Yeah.
have experienced Cronenberg the actor, but oddly not Cronenberg the director.
Okay.
It's so weird. We did Black Christmas, which is also made in Toronto, but we didn't do We haven't done Cronenberg. Yeah, I can't
right.
explain it at all. But
We will
all right.
revisit all this later, but let's move on because we've got a lot to talk about.
So let's get started. One of the first things I wanted to mention, I guess, before I do want to talk about nostalgia, but first we should talk about very briefly where the characters are from last season, and a few new characters are introduced early on, like in the first episode. So does anybody want to? I didn't give anybody this assignment. Does anybody want to step up and just sort of briefly recap where everything is, like who's new and what's going on? Joya, do you want to take a shot at this?
Sure. So we open the first episode with meeting a bunch of characters, not really meeting them, but just kind of seeing them, these young adults in a van who have clearly committed some kind of crime and are running from the police, and we see one of the females just gesture with her hand, boom, and then this bridge collapses behind them. They're stopping the cops from pursuing them. But then when you go to the cops, only one of them sees this. The rest of them are seeing the intact bridge. So it's a psychological trick that she's played. And then you see her wrist, and she has a number 8, just like 11 has her number 11. So you know that she's one of the lab kids. And then that's it for them for now. We'll talk about them next week because they don't come back.
Well,
but then we
I
go
love the
visit
fact that they were punk rockers, though.
Yeah,
Like,
they're punk rockers.
Yes.
They're interesting. So then we go back to our friends again, and they're at an arcade, and they are dismayed to find out that Dusty's record has been beaten by someone named Mad Max, and they don't know who that is. And we will be meeting Mad Max in the first 4 episodes, and it will turn out to be Maxine, the lovely Maxine. And, of course, the boys will become a little bit obsessed with her. Even in the first episode, they're kind of obsessed with who she is.
Yeah.
And then she becomes a part of the group, although always an outsider, because they haven't felt like they can tell her what's happened, and so she can't be an insider yet. And then and she's a threat to 11's status as, the girl of the group and
As
and
the
all that.
mascot girl. What were you going to say, Tony?
Yeah.
So, by the way, they didn't bring nearly enough quarters to play motherfucking Space Ace. That game is
Well,
brutal.
one of them
I've
said
seen
he
people
had
who
like
can.
one of them said he had like $20 in quarters or something like that. So they do have a lot of quarters.
That's still not enough. Now, I have seen people beat it on a quarter after they spent, after they spent all of their allowance / money they made mowing lawns or whatever hard-earned cash you had. That game was brutal. And
There still wasn't enough.
I also lamented that I was looking at another thread somewhere, and someone was like, "There's no way those graphics were that good back there." And then,
Are they
could be.
like, just Google it. It was hand drawn. It was the laser. You were playing a laser disc.
It was a
Basically.
disc. Yeah, it was the first game. Maybe not the first, But it was
I
an
think
early game to have used a disc inside the
Yeah.
the cabinet.
well, basically your input made it skip to a different track. So
Right.
Right.
it was the joystick was as if it were a remote on your DVD player, but much more complicated than that. It actually had a laserdisc inside it, and it was a pain to keep those laserdisc players up and running, by the way. But
Sure.
yeah, I
They
just
said
was watching that. I'm like, space. Like, luckily they weren't playing Space Ace, which like was its kind of pseudo sequel. Don Bluth did the Space Ace. That game was even more brutal, and just you played that a few times, and I've seen people beat it again. I guess they had just spent their whole paycheck on it. I don't know, but it was
They
cool to
said
see that.
on the behind the scenes that they actually created this arcade out of this old building. It's like dry cleaner or something,
Yeah.
and they actually had like all these games that worked, and they didn't actually need quarters, so they had a lot of fun playing these games.
Oh hell
I'll
yeah,
bet.
that sounds great. But it was
So
cool.
yeah,
I
so
mean,
that
yeah, Dragon's Lair. Yeah, it's so funny to think back about Dragon's Lair and the way that game played, and I can absolutely imagine them running to play this and being just fascinated that it exists. Even though it was a very frustrating game, and God, think about that. There were so many. I remember at that time there were all these games that were experimenting with that because there were also some that used full motion video that same concepts. They used a laser disc inside the cabinet. There was one that had like cowboys that were in a duel. And
Yeah,
that
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 was the
came and
Japanese
went.
animated one. There was
well,
also Fire.
this is what I mean when I was saying that we should open talking about nostalgia, because so we can actually get back to the plot in a minute. But yeah, I mean, just what you
Okay,
guys are talking about, where you're just like reliving these games.
okay,
That is what's
all
so
right.
great about this.
Good. Actually, let me just really quickly run through who else has joined. So there's Maxine. There's also now a new mad scientist slash pediatrician running the evil
He's
lab.
not a pediatrician. He's like a therapist or like a psychologist or something.
Well,
But yeah.
whatever he is. Anyway, it's Paul Reiser, who was the evil, treacherous corporate jackwad Burke in Aliens, um, which is much the same time. This is strangely enough not the first, but the second show this year that Paul Reiser is playing an old, an older gentleman in a show
And
that
he
takes
looks
place during the 80s.
old. It's almost
Yeah.
like, I know he is old, but like it was
Not that
alarming
old.
to see how old he looks. Older than he
No, he does.
is then.
But the
Yeah.
thing is,
He's
I've been
gray. Like, I don't know. I was stunned at how old Paul Reiser looked, because
Yes.
I feel like
Well, I
I
mean,
saw him just a few years ago, and he basically looked the same as he did on Mad About You. So
sure.
I don't know.
Well, I mean, Paul Reiser is 60 years old. He might be looking a little older in this role. I've been watching him in Red Oaks for the past 3 years, so I'm accustomed to seeing him looking like this. So to me, this is sort of like it's what
But
Paul
it is,
Reiser looks like now.
yeah, it is a rude awakening if you haven't seen him since Mad About You. You're just like,
Yeah,
I
'cause-
guess
wow.
I guess I have not. I legitimately just have not been following the career of Paul Reiser the way I should have. I'm
I
sorry,
think
Paul. If you're listening to this, I'm sorry, Paul.
I wonder if I'm the only person that watches Red Oaks. I have no idea, but
I'm sure you're not the
whenever
only
I'm watching it, Joya will wander in and she'll go, "Oh my God, is that Paul Reiser?" Yes, it's Paul Reiser.
Well, the one time
Well,
I did that.
that was my
I don't
reaction.
think I do it. I don't think I do it every time. I'm not Mr. Short-term memory. Like, oh, Paul Reiser.
Gina Gershon
If
plays
anybody
his
doesn't
wife
remember
in that.
that was a Tom Hanks character on Saturday Night Live, which was hysterical.
You have to
Anyway,
have You have
then
to
you
have
got
a
to talk about
long-term memory to keep up with that. All right, and
yeah.
Paul Reiser and the other sort of stunt casting going on here. Just as last season we had Matthew Modine, now you've got Paul Reiser, and you've also got Sean Astin, who is the son of John Astin, and who is just old school Hollywood royalty.
And
Sean
he's
Astin.
of Goonies fame.
Yeah. Sean Astin of Goonies fame and of Rudy and of Lord of the Rings. Sean Astin, who like physically transforms himself all the time. Like we just saw him in that one where Drew Barrymore has short-term memory loss and keeps waking up every day and falling in love with Adam Sandler. And
That's not
uh,
just saw him. Are you talking about whatever that is that 51st Dates or?
I don't remember what it's called.
That's 51st
But
Dates, yeah.
That's not
Okay.
just. It's like 20 years ago.
All right, so how
But
long
yeah,
ago was 51st Dates? 51st
a long time.
Dates came out in 2004. That's 13 years ago.
13 years ago.
Anyway,
So I'm doing
Sean
what
Astin
you do and rounding up to the next decade.
right. Sean Astin looks completely different from what he did before. There, he was like super buff. He, a fitness obsessive, and so he was just like 0% body fat and all veins and muscles. Here, he is a middle-aged guy with a pot belly and just a big smile, and he's like this sort of beam of happiness. He's so happy and wonderful, in fact, that I spent the first, roughly up until very, very late in the series thinking that maybe he was, a
Actually, a
secret
bad guy.
villain.
Yeah,
Yeah.
me too.
Anyway, so Paul Reiser and Sean Astin are in here, and
Well, then I became convinced that he was
that's-
actually one of the lab kids, and he was going to turn out to have superpowers, but that didn't happen either.
right.
He is, however, delightful as Winona Ryder's dorky boyfriend.
He's great. He's a totally sweet, wonderful boyfriend. We come in media res for their relationship. They've already met. They're already in a relationship, and it's wonderful. Basically, he is literally the coolest boyfriend a single mom could have, because he is cool. He's not mean. He's not particularly judgmental. He's not weird. He's not Chris Christopherson and Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore. He's just a regular guy. Seems to be well adjusted.
I wouldn't say he's the coolest boyfriend. I'd say he's a good boyfriend. I don't think
No.
he's the
When I
coolest.
say
Kind of
cool,
dorky.
I don't mean
Yeah.
cool like Chris Christopherson and Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore either. I mean, those are like flip sides of because Hollywood always tells us that single moms basically always get one kind of boyfriend, and it's Chris Christopherson. He's like big and muscular and awesome, but he smacks you around, and eventually you have to leave and go to Phoenix. Not here. This is a nice guy, and yeah, we'll see how far that gets him. Okay, so having done all that. That catches us up.
And the psychotic stepbrother Billy of
Billy, the mutant love child of Kiefer Sutherland and Lost Boys and Rob Lowe, near as I can tell.
Rob Lowe. Well, I think he's just Rob Lowe in St. Elmo's Fire, just all over again, except psychotic.
I don't know. That mullet says Kiefer to me.
Oh, have you seen St. Elmo's Fire? That's exactly what.
Not in a while. Not in a while. Lost Boys. It probably won't surprise you to learn that Lost Boys is more in my regular rotation than St. Elmo's Fire.
I have seen St. Elmo's Fire a really embarrassing number of times. I love that movie. I love it especially because it is a problematic film. A lot of the plot doesn't make much sense, and you really get the feeling sometimes watching it that huge pieces of it have been clipped out and sort of left on the cutting room floor, so that you're not quite sure why certain things happen. Nevertheless, I can't take my eyes off it. I'll watch St. Elmo's Fire anytime you want. That's yeah. It's sad, I suppose. But anyway, he does. This kid looks a lot like Rob Lowe, and they've dressed him like Rob Lowe, oddly enough. And that's something that they do in this series, is that they pick models from the past to sort of lay out the template for how a character is going to dress. And that's really fun just to watch that happening. And that actually is a good segue back to the nostalgia aspect of this show, because I really think that what happens in the show is important, but really it's all in service of giving you 9 hours or whatever it is of sitting there watching and going, oh, hey, look at that. Oh, hey, look at that, over and over again. And I think it does that very effectively. Joya, what else did you see and hear that blew your mind?
I mean, well, movies-wise, of course, there's just reference after reference after the whole Ghostbusters thing of the boys in their costumes, and then
if I can interrupt you, Drew, did you find it believable that they would have these perfect? Ghostbusters is a new movie, and they're obsessed with it.
Their costumes, I had a Ghostbusters costume that my mom made me. It did not look this good. Like, I had a vacuum cleaner that I pretended to be with a proton pack, and you know, like we had like a stencil on Ghostbusters logo, because like the merchandising wasn't quite there yet. I mean, these are meant to be homemade. Like they show them sewing and putting the costumes together.
Yeah.
But these are the costumes I wish that I
Yeah.
had when I was a kid, pretending to be a Ghostbuster. Like, especially like that trap, the ghost trap. That thing is freaking sweet. Like, are you kidding? Like, you know.
I think he made it though.
Yeah, he did. He makes it out of. Dusty.
No, and they show that, and they go out of their way to show it. But like the fact of the matter is, like you would have had to make them, because like I don't think the merchandising for Ghostbusters really kicked in until like there was a few figures. I have a Stay Puft Marshmallow Man on my desk that is from 1984, and
that's remarkable.
Yeah, and it's in pristine condition, by the way.
But, that's truly remarkable. I remember no merchandising at all. So
the merchandising didn't really kick in until the cartoon started, and then they were like, oh, you know, Ghostbusters merchandise. But like they would have had to have made it. I do believe that is a movie that these kids really would have responded to.
Oh yeah.
Because, you know, like it's about all the stuff that they're into, and you know, the heroes are scientists. There's a couple of things I found a little too and actually, I'm glad in the the kind of dogging on the character of Winston, I thought was a little bit too much of an adult read on it. You know,
interesting.
I don't think so, because I mean, I was watching the behind the scenes thing that they did on Netflix, and the kids really seemed really into the idea that who would want to be Winston, and they're like debating it quite earnestly. And of course, they didn't even mention this in the behind the scenes, but they mentioned it in the show. The idea that just automatically because one kid is black he's gonna have to play Winston.
And I think that was fair. I think that was totally fair. I think like addressing that was fine. And honestly, Curtis is totally the Venkman. Like, let's get one thing out of the way. Like, in personality wise, like that kid is like the most Venkman-y of the bunch, because he's sarcastic, and you know, like he's totally the Bill Murray of that group. But Winston is always like the retroactive criticism of Winston, I think of as like a contemporary thing that like a lot of people who are fans, and also like even the Duffer Brothers had to admit Winston actually is funny. He has some of the best lines in Ghostbusters, and they mentioned the Duffer Brothers had to admit in the making of stuff that Winston is the character that really grounds the threat of everything that is going on in that movie. So as a Ghostbusters fan, that kind of pissed me off, because first of all, that didn't really ring true to the way kids talked about Ghostbusters when I was a kid, and secondly, like I just get tired of always having like Winston is one of my favorite was one of my favorites, so I always kind of get tired of like defending that, because Ernie Hudson rules. Thank you very much.
You're saying it just feels a little too easy to like go to the
It seems a little too easy, and it seems a little too like not. It didn't really, other than the race, like him addressing the race thing. Like, which I think is completely legitimate.
So which one are you saying should have been Venkman though? Because I think you said Curtis, but there's
the guy. Curtis should have been Venkman. The kid that is the black kid, the kid that they were trying to make Winston. He totally is more.
Lucas.
His name is Lucas.
He is Lucas. Yeah, you're right. Okay, now I'm embarrassed.
No, it's all good.
Totally. He's
he
the
is the
Bill
funny
Murray
one.
Of that group. He is totally the Bill Murray of that group.
That's true. Yeah.
He's like. And I think that was fair, and I also think that was them kind of addressing. This show did get some criticism for not having enough care, like kind of portraying a very like white bread version of the 1980s, and I feel like that discussion being in there on top of like them introducing more characters of color, I do really feel like that this show did do a good job of kind of addressing that. But that conversation of itself, the way it was written, did feel a little false for me. Like it didn't feel like it would actually come out of a kid's mouth. If what I'm saying makes sense.
I think you're in dangerous territory if you're going to analyze it like that. Because like I found myself doing things like, hey, would the older brother have a Kill 'Em All cassette? And actually, because 84 was when it kind of broke, but it came out in 83. The fact he was from California means he probably would have had it. But there's tons. You're really you got to pick your battles, man, in my
It's
opinion.
probably
Because
because Ghostbusters is something that I am into. Like that's gonna be one of the things that I like. Like I was a kid that was into Ghostbusters. I was younger than these kids, but like Ghostbusters was a big part of my 80s. Like another thing that like I remember like looking at was like when the because Friday the 13th was another thing I was into, when they do the Halloween sequence and they show the kid dressed up as Jason Voorhees. I was like, well, that costume looks more like Jason Takes Manhattan Jason, which didn't come out for like years. And admittedly, you're completely right. I'm thinking too hard. You're completely right.
So, for example, I noticed, by the way, there was never a game called Quest for the Space Knife. You see Space Knife everywhere, and it's because one of the set dresser guys has a band called Space Knife. But there's Space Knife posters. I spent a lot of time in arcades, and I was like, I wonder why they made up a game called Space Knife. Like, why isn't that just another game? Like, ends up it's a haha in joke Easter egg. But that's the kind of things I was pointing out, where I'm like, no, there's why this made up game. Yeah, I found out later. I looked it up, but yeah, I think, like I said, there's some music that doesn't quite fit in with the, what year they say it is and all that kind of stuff. You're gonna drive yourself crazy if those are the things you're trying to
look. You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Like and it is because it's just one of my little like where I'm sad little king of my sad little hill, and it's like one of the things that I am obsessed with, so I'm getting a little like, but it didn't detract from my overall nostalgic haze. Don't get me wrong. I love the fact that they were Ghostbusters, and actually I think it's very thematically interesting because when we think of the Ghostbusters in the movie, like the Ghostbusters are very much united as a unit. And I always think of like that last scene where they have like that wild bunch march towards Gozer, and they're like pulling all their proton packs in unison, and they're talking in unison, and we think of the Ghostbusters like they're odd men, but they're a unified group. But what's interesting about that, the contradiction of that is this season has the kids kind of breaking apart and starting to splinter as a group. So even though they're dressed,
that's a really valid point.
Thing.
That's a beautiful point, Drew. Yeah.
I'm sure that had to be deliberate because they have that whole, like they do have the debate over who gets to be Venkman, and they do have, the whole scene where they go into the junior high and they suddenly realize they're the only ones wearing costumes. And man, I can tell you, I was that freaking kid. Like that part rang true to me, like so spot on, because I was the one that held on to the Halloween costume a little too long.
I find that fascinating. I'm exactly the age of these kids, and so I don't remember wearing costumes to school. I don't remember stopping wearing costumes to school, but I really found this to be amazing and very poignant. Not the sort of comedy of them being in school and they're the only ones without costumes, but the question that he asks, where he says, how come nobody else is wearing costumes? Who makes these decisions? Like, you know, how does this happen? Who's writing these memos that says, hey, everybody's gonna just stop wearing costumes, or everybody's gonna start being really weird about who you sit with in the lunchroom? How does it kick in the way that it kicks in? And it certainly does, and one of the things I think is beautiful, by the way, about this show that I love, that I really just have a warm heart for, is how it constantly is following three tracks. Really, it follows the young kids, youngish, they're 12 or so, 13.
Yeah, they're eighth graders.
They're eighth graders, yeah. These at this point pubescent kids, right? The teenagers who have got their own thing going because they're nearing the end of high school and they're trying to figure out what they're going to do with their lives, and then the adults who really are distant third, but you do go back to the adults from time to time. But
what's interesting to me about the two groups of kids is it's more true in the first season. It's less true in this one. But you want to talk about it like referencing, like you have like two almost like 80s genres going like next to each other. You had the like teenagers who seemed like they could have been out of like a Nightmare on Elm Street sequel, and then you
Yeah.
had the kids who were of course very much from that Goonies, Stand By Me, Monster Squad, like kids on bikes genre.
Yeah. And there's less of it in this season than in the last. I mean, for instance, one thing that I found so familiar to my own childhood was how they all get around on bikes in the first season. And do you remember how much, in my memory of the first season, they spend a lot of their time like going off road to sort of make an end run around what the adults are doing. And in this one, I know they're still on their bikes and so forth, but there seemed to be less of that. There was
Well, in
less.
this one, it's like the adults don't even care anymore about what the kids are doing. It's kind of just forgotten
That's a good
about
point.
them.
Well, and by the end of this thing, just well, you know what? I won't even say that. What I will say is this: the two groups of kids are merging because the younger kids are aging into being teenagers and being part of that group, and it
Well,
means
and
that
everybody becomes
yeah.
involved with the plot kind of together, so they're
Right.
not
Well, there's
having their
also
own.
the thing where all the adults in this series know that this is Creepy Town that has weird demon undergrounds and stuff like that. Okay, so other elements of nostalgia.
For me, I
Uh,
have found, and not only with this show, but also with Halloween in real life, that I just that when you have that memory that comes back to you, that you can remember how things taste and feel and smell because you see something or you smell something, and it just evokes these memories. And for me, it was watching. Because it's another part of the plot that's going on in these 4 episodes is that we learn that Eleven has come back from the Upside Down and has been saved by Chief Hopper, and he is now caring for her in this cabin in the woods, not in a creepy way, but actually in a very sweet paternal way.
yeah.
He's been kind of raising her. And they eat TV dinners, and they eat straight up TV dinners the way that I ate TV dinners, not regularly, because my mom actually cooked quite a bit, but I loved eating them. When I got the opportunity, I was actually really excited because I just loved them. And then when they were opening it, I could just feel the TV dinner in my hand and the foil, and I could remember the taste of each of the things, like even the mashed potatoes that probably tasted like garbage, but to me they were
Yeah.
wonderful. And just all of that.
Weirdly petrified. Those mashed potatoes that came in a Swanson's TV dinner, those were some strange potatoes because they
Yeah,
were
it was
like they're always covered over in this weird crust. It's very,
right.
it's just an odd, very
But all
strange
those
food.
things it was so happy. I just felt so happy, like watching that and just remembering those things. And then I had a similar experience eating some of my kids' Halloween candy because she had some spree that she didn't want, or sprees, whatever you call them. And I was like, oh my gosh, I used to buy the rolls of sprees at the 7-Eleven next to the elementary school. And I can remember like breaking the roll in half and then eating the first one off of both halves so that I could have enough foil to close it, seal it off. I just can remember like the physical sensation of all. So anyway, so that to me has been a real fun part of watching this series. Is just any time like I see an outfit or a poster or like I hear some music or whatever, and I'm like, oh my gosh. That's at the very end. I know we're not talking about the last episode, but when they do the school dance, just all these flood of memories just come back. It's a lot of fun to relive some of that and have without the trauma, relive it without having the trauma of being a middle schooler.
The thing that always pops into my mind when I watch this show is remembering that, and I know we made this observation last year, but that this moment that they are living in this series is the last moment where life was more or less analog. You had exposure to digital entertainment, video games and if you were a rich kid, CDs, for instance. In '84, some people had CDs, but generally it's an analog world. If you want to call home, you need to get to somebody's house where they have a phone,
Or a payphone.
or a payphone.
Well, yeah, and
If
parents have to live with the fact that they just don't know where the kids are all the time.
right.
you know?
I lived that universe. I
Yeah.
absolutely lived in that universe where my mom would say, just be home by dark. That
Yeah.
was just the thing, and you just left. And I mean, I was 11 or 12 years old, and we would walk all over town, and we would walk across town, we would walk into the next town. Nobody cared. Nobody regarded this as unusual. And I'm saying that as though it's a thing. If you haven't paid any attention to all of this, that is not the case today. In 2017, we're turning now into 2018 pretty soon. These days, I have lots of friends who are parents of 11 and 12-year-olds, and
As are we.
as we are, and they don't want to let their kids be alone on the streets, which is
Right.
strange because there were rapists and murderers in the 80s too.
Yeah, but it
It's
wasn't a thing that
odd.
we were really that aware of, honestly. No,
Well,
I really
the
watched.
other thing about, like, you're talking about the change in analog versus where we're at in the sort of information overload.
Yeah.
I think part of the reason why parents were probably less fearful is because now we have news bombarding us literally from
Right.
Yeah.
sun up to
24 hours
sun
a day,
down.
yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I have a news app on my phone, and the moment I turn it on, I guarantee you it's the most horrible thing that has happened.
I can't
that
even
day.
do that,
So
man. I purposely don't look at my news app.
I've debated deleting it.
But
I've debated deleting it.
I
and
can't do it. It's why I watch less. There are certain horror movies that I watch a lot less of because, damn it, like the world has a lot of problems. Speaking of the analog thing though. So I liked that Sean Astin's character, the way that they rent movies is because he has a video camera, which was how I first started watching VHS because we couldn't afford a DVD player. However, my stepdad filmed the football games for the football team. So he would get up on top of the bleachers, on top of the press box, film the game on tripod. However, he got to bring home the camera, which if you hook it up is a VCR, and that is awesome. And that's how I saw, I think, the second Conan movie and started watching that. We would rent, at the time you had to like join a video club, and it was
Absolutely.
The first one that we could do was in a truck stop next door to the local Piggly Wiggly, and we joined that one and would rent 2 to 3 movies in, and it was expensive for the time though, but that's how we saw it. And I just thought that again, that's some nostalgia because of course that family can't afford a VCR, but hey, he works at Radio Shack and he's got a video camera. Now let's rent movies. Oh, that was cool.
Yeah, it was very cool, and I love that moment. And that's within these first 4 episodes. Is they go to the trouble to remind you that that's what she has to do. Is she has to find the some means of attaching this camera to her TV so she can watch the tape. Oh, it's so wonderful. By the way, I just want to say this, especially for those of our listeners who want to remember, or those of our listeners who are too young to remember. So 1984. So by the time I was in high school, which started in 1985, the typical way to entertain yourself, everybody had a VCR by then, mostly, and because those things were coming down in price. And so what you would do is you would go out on a Friday night, usually to your grocery store, which is where you would get videotapes, because grocery stores were buying rental videotapes to then rent out, and they were very, very expensive. So and this was the whole model, is they would spend a whole bunch of money and then rent them out to you. And so you would go and walk around with your friends and just like, oh, what do you think about this? I'm like, do you like this? What do you think about Raiders of the Lost Ark? Is this okay? And then you'd pick 3 or 4 movies and you take them, and maybe you would watch 1 or 2 of them. That was just how it worked. They actually featured this here. He goes, somebody goes, I didn't know what you want to watch, so I got 3 movies, you choose. And they chose to watch Mr. Mom, which is a very funny movie. But the first time I rented movies was Curtis Mathis, which was an electronics store, not unlike, it was more commercial than Radio Shack. Anyway, Curtis Mathis in Killeen, Texas, rented out movies. So it was my birthday, and we rented The Blob, The Son of the Blob. It's remarkable to me that The Son of the Blob was available, and Raiders of the Lost Ark. And this was 1984. So it was exactly the time that we're talking about right here. And I remember that as clear as a bell, because being able to bring home a movie was a mind-blowing achievement. And that's, so we talk about all the time, like, hey, would these guys have been able to see like I Walked with a Zombie? Hell no. At best you could like pick up a book that might have a still from I Walked with a Zombie and go, oh yeah, well that looks really cool. Maybe someday, eventually, I don't know, I'll break into a vault somewhere that has a copy of that and I'll be able to watch it myself, because there was no means of watching stuff unless it came on TV live and you just happened to catch it, or
Well, you need to
Or you
the
record it.
recorded it.
small amount of stuff.
You'd
Yeah, you
record it.
recorded
That's
it.
how that's how I would capture these movies so I could rewatch them. Is when they were on TV. I would, or if I for whatever reason I was going to miss it, I would have my
But it'd
mom
be
record
super
it.
rare. I mean, like, how do you know when Plan 9 from Outer Space is going to
Yeah,
come
because
on?
it's not like you can have it. It's not like a DVR where you can just go record it next time it comes on. You have to like look in the TV listings every week and see
TV
if it's
guide,
going to be.
man.
Yeah.
I will say this. It did get to a point where there was a lot of stuff out, because like my local video stores were pretty
Yeah.
well stocked with that stuff. That's how I got into it. But like,
No, you're right. You're exactly right.
Like I remember I had this one Godzilla movie marathon that my aunt had recorded for me, and that's how I saw a lot of like the '60s Godzilla movies. Is that she recorded them all for me, and they still had all the ads, like all the commercials and everything. So I like for the longest time I would just rewatch, and I'd go ahead and let the commercials go and everything.
Sure. No, I was recording. I recorded, War of the Worlds off TV and Count Dracula off TV. But yeah, and cable was coming. So some people had cable. Like I did have cable sometimes, around this time, and so there were channels that were playing more and more stuff that you would record. But the one thing, and Joy, I heard you, and I just want to like answer this really quick. Drew, one thing that you brought up that I think is a very, very interesting trend is that VHS in the next couple of years, like from here in 1984 on, for the next couple of years, all of a sudden there'll be this like mushroom explosion of VHS tapes. Stuff that it was the first time that it was licensed for home consumption and has not been licensed since. Has never been licensed for DVD. Will maybe not show up on streaming unless somebody is willing to rip it off. There was an explosion of VHS material. They couldn't make enough VHS material. It was amazing. Anyway, so that does become kind of a golden age. Go ahead, Joanne.
I was just thinking, it's so funny that here we are talking about all the stuff that we did when we were this age and what it was like, and we do this a lot when we show our kids, 80s movies as well. And it's so funny. I was just thinking, oh my gosh, yet another way in which we've become our parents. Because I remember my parents, and I know I've heard Jason's parents do this too, talk about what life was like, in the 50s and 60s, and it's like, well, this is what it was like when I was growing. And now we're doing it. It just makes me laugh. I'm like thinking about all the teenagers and millennials who are just going, yeah, okay.
Well, it's funny. Like I do wonder how kids who were born in, I have friends that are younger than me that were born in the 90s, and I think about like, I was like, man, like to have no frame of reference for this time period. Like what does watching this show just seem like watching this weird alien?
Yeah, like just
world?
use your cell phone. Why don't you just use your cell phone, or why don't you just get on the computer and look it up?
Use the internet.
I don't think it's like that, because first of all, in the 70s, when I was a little bit younger than this, first of all, we had Happy Days.
Jason, you don't think it's like that? You told me yourself that you had a coworker ask you if you were in Vietnam. That's exactly
Yes.
what it's like. I have no idea.
But that was, first of all, she was a very young.
The answer should have been yes.
The name. It was a dark time.
I would have made up so many things. Yes. You
should have melted that.
They also have voodoo, and I actually had to fight the undead, or like any number. When I came back, I had to remove so many tattoos. That's just what we did then. Just why
But
do
I'm
I
telling you,
need
they're not. Maybe I'm not saying that everyone is ignorant, but there's plenty of people who have no concept of when certain things happen, and I feel, and I'm the same way with stuff that happened before I was born. I mean, I'm perfectly likely to ask somebody a question that has to do with driving or air conditioning or whatever that makes it sound like I'm a complete idiot, because I'll be like, well, did you have cars? They'll be like, duh, it's not 1900. We had cars.
So,
So I mean, there's plenty of things like that where you go, I think that I know when this happened. And so I don't think it's that preposterous to believe that people would watch it and go, why aren't they looking on their computers? Didn't they have computers back then or whatever? Yeah, they had computers, but it wasn't like people had laptops with internet. There was giant room-sized computers and big fat desktops that you had that had but basic, like he was talking about coding basic. It's like, well, you have to know how to code basic to be able to do these things. Yeah.
Wait, Tony, what were you going to say? Go ahead.
Here's the difference. At that time, we did not have a thing called Google. Guess what?
Right.
On your supercomputer in your hand, you can go, were there cars in 19 blah blah blah?
Exactly.
So none of that holds water, because in the same respect of like, wow, that must have been weird not to have internet, blah blah blah. The fact is, we all have that now.
Yeah.
There's not a really good reason to go like, I don't believe. Wait.
No, but I don't mean that. I just mean as you're watching something and you're not necessarily looking up every single thing to see if that's right. I could see watching something like this and thinking, well, I don't understand. Why don't they do this? Did they not have that? That's what, because you just don't know. You don't know if it came before you. If it came before you were born, you don't know when before you were born. And yes, you can stop and look everything up, but if you're not doing that, you're just watching. But anyway, I just think it's funny. But yes, as a parent, I'll just say this. As a parent of a kid this age, and then also having been this age at this year specifically, I mean, we were actually in 8th grade in 1984, and now I'm a parent of a 7th grader and a 15-year-old. So it's like I'm watching this, and I can't. It's kind of, I feel schizophrenic. I feel like I have split personality disorder, because I go back and forth between the two generations constantly watching this program, because I'll be like, oh my gosh, as a parent, I would be so upset that my child is suffering in this way and there's nothing I can do. But then I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm just like the kid, because I remember that exact thing and having that exact the sheets that Mike has. I had those exact sheets with the geometric the Mondrian style, like black and white with the colors. I mean, I just I feel really I feel really schizophrenic watching it.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
One other thing, and I guess, man, we should probably start talking less about nostalgia and about the show. But one thing that struck me when Jason was talking about the stuff coming to VHS, and there was this explosion. Yeah. So I had one, my stepdad took us to Mississippi, but I would come, all my family, I'm born in Texas, I'm in Texas. We would come back to Texas to stay with my grandparents. My grandfather ran a TV repair shop. He also got a lot of electronics mags and stuff. And so, but one of them was about VHS. And so it would have all the previews for stuff that was coming out on VHS. And you would, since they were trying to sell, you would buy a person who was going to rent VHS would buy as an $80 tape, which was crazy expensive at the time, and then make all the money renting it out. And they knew that's why they made it so high. But they did these deals where, you bought RoboCop, you'll get these 3 or 4 other things that we want to sell you because we don't think they're going to do that well, but it'll fill up your shelf and somebody's going to rent this crap, basically was how they usually pawn it off. Whether it was crap or not, some of it was probably awesome stuff that I would enjoy, but to the resellers, it was like, somebody, I guess, is going to rent this, but you want RoboCop, so you'll take it. And it was always really cool to see, I had the kind of inside scoop during the summer on when stuff was coming out and when it would appear and what would oh man, that's cool. I don't even know what that is. Hopefully I'll find it on the shelf. I thought that was awesome at the time.
That's extremely cool. There was a whole language at the time of the way video cassettes were marketed, where much like paperback books, where video cassettes had they competed with one another for who could have the most gonzo, bizarre, sometimes with all kinds of accoutrement like foil or embossing or whatever, anything that would make you pause a split second more and look at this film. and decide maybe to rent it, and so that's why the art from the VHS era is fabulous.
It's also
It's
where you learn that anything with a painted barbarian cover,
yeah,
anything that couldn't be trusted with live action was probably crap.
yeah,
Like
no, for sure,
it had a Boris or Frazetta cover, man, that was gonna be crappy.
yeah, yes,
Terrible, but had this cool
yeah.
cover. So, but it didn't take but about 3 of those movies, barbarian movies, before
Yes.
you're like, I'm not getting had. I mean, I like low budget, but this isn't working. That's hilarious. But anyway,
I'm having flashbacks to the destruction. I know we got to go on, but I'm just thinking about the destruction of Jared Sin and that
I think I
that
saw that video.
fabulous cover. Oh my gosh. Okay,
No, I saw
so
Space Center in the theater.
the other thing because I really do want to talk about the trends on this show more than the plot. We can talk about the plot to the extent that we want to, but um, there was Drew. You wanted to bring up, and I think it's just a brilliant point, the class politics in this show. The what it is to be upper middle class versus working class. And those are really, I mean, you have very few like truly rich people in this series, but you have a suburb or whatever this is. It's a little town, and you got basically the upper middle class and the middle class, and I guess the working class sort of constantly at odds with one another, but friends with one another. And I think this is one of the few shows that kind of shows that to you. You don't really see that a lot. What were your thoughts there?
It really started to solidify with me when we see the scenes of them trick or treating, and you see the different houses they go by, and
Yeah,
you see some of the houses have the Reagan reelection signs, and then there's the houses that have the Mondale signs on them, and it seems like you have like the more like working class families going Mondale, and then you have like the
yeah,
upper class families with the Reagan signs, and that really like really. I wasn't old enough to really appreciate what was going on, but I do remember those signs, and I remember being out on Halloween night, and I remember
yeah,
seeing those, and I felt like that they really portrayed that very accurately, and it's funny, they never talk about class overtly, and they never talk about race overtly, but there's definitely a lot of stuff going on there. Winona Ryder's character is, not, like her family's lower income, and even her
yeah.
boyfriend, he's the manager of a Radio Shack. I don't know
Right.
how much that job pays, but it's probably not a great deal. And they showed them with this more modest living, and then you have like the characters of Nancy's parents who have this again, and I remember houses that looked like that. They have this
Yeah.
nicer sort of suburban looking 1980s house with like a basement, and that's kind of how that they have money, is they have a basement for some reason. And
Yeah.
Well, there's also they have the beautiful open plan that they have all of this white painted all these white painted walls, whereas everybody who's in the next two tiers of economy in this town have wood paneling,
Well, and
but
I'll
not the
also
like
say,
the
so much brown, so much
yeah,
Drew, basements in Texas, of course, are super unusual, but here in Colorado, all the houses have basements because you have to have your pipes have to be inside. They can't be underground because of the freeze, and so we all have basements. The question is how nicely finished they might be, but so that's
yes,
not
indeed.
necessarily indicative.
It's funny, maybe that's why, because as somebody that grew up in Texas, I always associated having a basement with somebody seeming like they had money, because
Yeah.
everybody I knew that had a basement had a really big house.
Yeah,
Yeah.
in Texas that's the case, but here and in like I don't know exactly where. Where did we decide that this is supposed to be taking place?
Well, it's Hawkins, Indiana. It's Hawkins, Indiana.
Yeah, so I imagine Indiana they probably have at least storm cellars. It seems like
That's probably true, but like they all play Dungeons and Dragons in Finn Wolfhard's character's house, and that seems to be the nicest house on the show. Although Lucas's parents seem to be relatively middle
they're
class
scientists
as well.
They're scientists, and they're so the two of the group of friends. The most well off are Lucas, the sole African American. I mean, the reason why this is a very white show is that they live in a very white community in the 80s, but the sole black family in this town, he's a scientist. He's probably a very highly paid scientist at the lab, and so he has a nice house.
Maybe he's
Nancy,
the scientist from Terminator.
Oh my God. I love that idea.
Like if he just said, "Oh yeah, my brother Dyson," that would be amazing.
Oh man. So Nancy and is it Will? No. I'm trying to remember the
Finn
name of
Finn Wolfhard's character.
Yes, Finn Wolfhard's
and
character and the Nancy character. Anyway,
So you've got Dustin. Dustin has no siblings. Mike is the brother of.
That's it, Mike.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
Mike is the brother of Nancy, and then you've got Jonathan and Will, who are brothers, and then Lucas.
And now you have Maxine and Billy, who.
And then Maxine and Billy. So that's why Dustin pairing up with Steve makes a lot of sense, because they're the only ones who don't have siblings, aside from of course 11, who does actually. 11 ends up having a sibling too, because she has her number 8.
So Maxine and Billy also occupy a lower rung in the socioeconomic ladder. Their house is also not that nice. They also
it's a sweet car though.
Yeah. I can't.
But he's supposed to be a gear. He's supposed to be a gearhead. I mean, that's.
Yeah.
He is the one. Billy is the one character that is an. Maybe if they do a third one of these, we'll see him grow a little bit. But he seems to be an out-and-out archetype, just played to the hilt. Like he has a muscle car, and he wears lots of denim, and he listens to hard rock, and he's
spends a lot
bully.
of time on his hair.
And he's a bully. A terrible bully. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Although because of where I lived in Mississippi, those guys listened to like AC/DC.
Yeah.
Like I think I caught a lot of crap for listening to Metallica and stuff like that. So those guys were like he's slightly cooler than maybe the people I knew in Mississippi. But what I thought was interesting is kind of what you're hitting on, like what poverty looks like in the 80s and what rich people, like how that happens. Like, because I mean, rich kids often had like the toys you wanted from the Sears catalog, right? Like a rich friend of yours would have like the robots that were really crappy.
Or Atari. They had like Atari and then Nintendo. They'd get Nintendo whenever that came out and all that. Yeah.
Because I was talking to some people the other day just about 80s stuff in discussion, like some newer animators on my team, and what that was like, and then also like the difference in just weird different things of like your experiences. Because I mean, there was a time like when we didn't have much money, my family. So like you never forget the taste. When you're talking about like TV dinners and stuff, let me tell you, you never forget the taste of Wick government cheese or powdered milk, which is awful. And we didn't have that all the time, but it was a thing. Like all of these things that are like, and Mississippi itself it's a big deal with poverty. There's a lot of it to be had. Yeah. We eventually were firmly just super middle class, once my parents were both teachers, et cetera, et cetera. But it was like some of the wallpaper even. Like I will give it up that like there's a wallpaper in one of the houses that has these like flags on it. Wherever they found that print, straight up, whoever found that, it's perfect. And I know exactly That was
That's what
in-house.
I'm saying. The prop masters are amazing. Like I said, the fact that they found that he had my exact sheets. I mean, what the hell? It's so. I don't know how they do it, because they don't. It's not like they just have all this stuff lying around from the 80s and then they pull it back out, because it all looks new. So they just recreated it, I guess, from pictures and from whatever else. But yeah, they did a great job on it.
Yeah. Anyway, like I said, we should probably move the plot forward a little bit.
I
We haven't had quite the
suppose.
nostalgia
Well,
fest. so I apologize.
Will is not doing well. That's
Right.
the whole reason
So yeah,
why Paul Reiser is here.
Will has birthed the Demogorgon. He absorbed a Demogorgon slug and then vomited it into the sink, and then it has somehow gotten back out of the sewer and into the trash can where Dustin finds it and decides to keep it as a pet.
And his Ghostbusters.
Because he hasn't seen Gremlins yet. That hasn't happened. So
Yeah, the plot
no.
the plot of this first 4 episodes can be boiled down this way. The Will, who was kind of, even though he's central to the plot, he was missing from a lot of the first season. Here he reveals himself in this season to be an extremely sensitive performer. I mean, just a really, really good young actor. But he is having visions of beings from the upside down, which is the other dimension. Meanwhile, there's the new girl Maxine, and the boys are trying to decide whether to integrate her. Winona Ryder has a new boyfriend, and and that's pretty much the plot. These first 4 episodes, up
And
until the end
you got the
of
teenagers who are trying to
Right.
investigate what happened to Barb, and along with
whatever
Barb's
happened
parents.
to Barb.
Oh,
because
that's
Barb,
right. They
who's-
follow up on Barb because people on the
Yeah.
internet would not let that go.
Although I'm
Yeah.
deeply disappointed
Justice
because,
for Barb.
first of all, these guys can write whatever they want. So just because we saw Barb's body in the Upside Down doesn't mean that she has to be dead. If you had wanted to bring back Barb, they could have brought her back. There's
Well,
no-
even as
an illusion, like a haunting kind of thing.
I don't
What-
think they
what
wanted
would
did
they
what
have
did.
done with Barb? I mean, Barb was very clearly meant to die.
That's what I'm
Like-
saying.
Yeah,
But
no,
that
I'm
would
with
have
you.
been a haunting type of thing.
Like-
What'd you say, Tony?
No, I like exactly what they did, because it basically adds more humanity to everyone who has survived. Like her parents, the thing they do. Like I'm really happy that they didn't bow to internet pressure and be like, oh, and here's Barb because everyone drew pictures.
Yeah.
Like they kept her
Yeah.
dead, but they kept a reality to it.
Yeah, she's
missing. The
important
government
to
has
the
covered
plot.
this up. The government cover-up part of it is more poignant. The fact her parents still have hope. All that stuff wouldn't happen if it was like, and here's some Barb because everybody loves Barb. And she was awesome.
Or if they had done what they did with Will and just given her a fake body and then they buried that and that's the end of it. It's like this whole idea that we need to find out what happened to her and get to the bottom of it and all that.
If both Will survives and Barb survives, then like the first season really wouldn't have had any stakes. And
Yeah.
that's
Exactly.
why I agree with Tony, especially going the way they went with this season where it is more horrific in places.
Yeah.
I think they had to kind of add some weight to it. And I mean, admittedly, Will does not come out of season 1 unscathed. He's got terrible post-traumatic stress disorder, which
Well, and he keeps he's connected to the Upside Down, so he keeps going back and forth. That's actually what makes this show relevant to even our podcast is like you said, the horror aspect of it, which is the Upside Down and the creature, the Demogorgon, or the big smoke spider shadow monster. I think that what they've done with the Upside Down is amazing. I mean, I am absolutely blown away by how you can have your exact set, that you're walking around in the high school or you're just outside or wherever you are, and then have it be this horrific hell place at the same time, just because Will crosses back over to the other dimension. I think it's fantastic, and I really, like I said again, as a parent, I was just like, so I related a lot more to the parent than to the kid in that regard, because I can't imagine experiencing something like that, but I can definitely imagine having your child.
Although that kid playing Will is phenomenal. Like, and I mean, we'll talk more about it next week, but I don't think I've seen somebody pull off like a possession like that well since Linda Blair. Like,
well, you can talk about it this time because this is during these episodes is when he gets attacked by the shadow monster.
But it's true that we don't see
Yeah.
him possessed. But I do want to say
But you
this: the
see him do
reason
the whole thing where he's just being like completely filled by the black smoke. And I mean,
that happens
I
in
felt,
episode 4.
yeah,
Yeah,
that happens here, and just the way he delivers that. I mean, because he's just standing there. They just said, just shake like you're being filled by black smoke. I mean, that's gotta be really
yeah,
hard
it's
to
horrible.
pull off.
It is truly,
Well, and
truly horrible. Yeah,
I love
sorry.
the fact that he gets there by getting really, really bad advice from Sean Astin.
Okay,
Yeah,
so at that point, I thought Sean Astin. So Will says,
bad guy.
I keep seeing this monster in my visions, and I'm running from it. And Sean Astin goes, well, what I always did when I was a kid is I just said, no, stop, because I had
When I had
visions of,
when I had these dreams of these fantasies of this
yeah,
scary
some
clown of
moron let him
Pennywise.
read it.
Yeah.
And well, no, it would have been years before yet. Don't worry, forget that. That didn't land. But the thing is, Sean Astin says you should stop and face your fears, and that's when I was thinking, oh, Sean Astin's a bad guy. He's a plant. He's working for Paul
Yeah.
Reiser. That was my
Because it
thought.
sounded just like what Matthew Modine tells Eleven of, no, don't run away from the monster, just face it. So it's like they want to know, like the scientists want to know what will happen if if you face it, and they don't really care if you're gonna hurt or not. So that's why I assumed the same thing. I assumed that he was a part of the mad scientist.
Yeah. And we can get into next episode what actually becomes of Sean Astin, because I don't want to spoil it here. But there's one big piece of the last big piece of the plot that we haven't mentioned at all, and I think that's one of the main flaws of the first half of this season. I'm sorry to say, is there's also a character called Eleven, who was a huge fan favorite in the
Yeah,
first
but
season.
her story with the chief is already well underway at this point, because she even escapes the cabin and goes to see Mike, and then sees Mike with Max, and Max is trying to win Mike over by showing him what she can do with her skateboard.
Yeah, I agree.
That's
But the
in
thing is,
this yeah.
it feels frustrating to me. Maybe I'm wrong, but I this is like when Buffy the Vampire Slayer used to come back every season, and they would spend the first 5 or 6 episodes with Buffy like being pissy about whatever and not being friends with anybody. And so it would take like half the season to get the whole Scooby Gang back together. And
Right.
so it was really only in the second half of the season that you would have the whole team working together. Same thing going on here. They've got 11 in her own storyline where she's hiding out under the auspices of the sheriff, and then she's going to go out on a pilgrimage. And it means that when the boys are doing all their investigating, they don't have their superpowered friend, and
That's
that's
But
true, but I think
11 would end a lot of problems as quick as they happen. Like
that's
exactly.
true.
You wouldn't have the conflict, but also I think there's a lot of value to having this relationship between her and the chief, because she's grown up without real parents. I mean, the only person she had that was a father figure was super abusive, and now she has this really kind-hearted person who actually cares for her. And then he has lost his daughter. So I think there's a lot of really nice character work being done with these guys. And so I don't think
I agree with that.
I mean, I agree that there's some stuff that but I don't think it's a problem. I think that they did a great job timing all that.
One of my favorite bits in this whole thing, and it's barely anything, is 11 being frustrated on Halloween night because the sheriff was saying that he was going to come home and they were going to watch a scary movie and eat candy.
Yeah.
And he wouldn't let her go trick or treat. She wanted to go dressed as a ghost, which was
she
really
wanted to
funny,
go as a ghost.
Ghostbusters.
And she's there watching the scene from the Boris Karloff Frankenstein where the monster's talking to the little girl.
Yeah.
And I loved that scene because, of course, visually you're going to be thinking, well, 11's the little girl. But actually, she's Frankenstein's monster. And I loved her watching that. I love that. Like I love that scene. And I do really like the relationship they created. I think Julie is absolutely right.
Yeah.
And also, funnily enough, when we did Halloween 3, we were wondering who could have played the Tom Atkins part if they remade that. The guy who plays the sheriff in this could nail. He's that exact same kind of like man's man
David Harbour
actor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He really is. Of course, he's going to be playing Hellboy pretty soon. So
he said in the behind the scenes thing that he didn't want to be the Full House dad.
Yeah.
He's like, I like that I get to be not just the dad, but also like a man, with other stuff going on and going out and solving mysteries or whatever. Because he's like, I don't want
Yeah.
to be the full dad. Cracks me up.
I do. I like this. I like these characters. We don't spend as much time with them necessarily as we could. There's so many characters.
Although she
So
basically does get her. I mean, we won't talk about it till next week. She does basically get to go off on her own little X-Men adventure.
yes,
Well, and that's
yes,
because, in
yes.
part, because he gets caught up. The chief gets caught up investigating what the hell's happened with all these rotting pumpkins, and then he finds this portal to the upside down, and then he will get stuck in there, and so that's the only reason she's able to have her adventures, because he doesn't come back. If he had come
Well,
back
and
at 5:15 like he was supposed to, and had the Halloween night, then she would have probably been stuck there another.
That visual of him in the rotten pumpkin patch has been used in so many advertising things, and I have to say, like, what a perfect Halloween advertising campaign that was. Like, that is a beautiful, just as a still, that is a beautiful piece of imagery right there. Like,
it's a really wonderful point. Yeah, yeah. I hadn't thought about that. How the pumpkin patch is kind of perfectly in keeping with the time, that this was coming out. That it just sort of worked out beautifully that way.
They wrapped it all around Halloween. I mean, even that Comic-Con trailer with like the use of Thriller in it was like, you want to talk about hitting all those nostalgia buttons. I mean, damn.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. We should, let's see, we talked about the Pollywog a little bit. We'll talk about it a little bit more, but basically, yes, Dustin has picked up this critter that he catches in his Ghostbusters trap, and the plot involves trying to figure out what you're going to do with this thing, and everybody else thinks it's going to be a demonic creature. He
Well, and
thinks
the
it's kind of
question always
sweet, and
is,
he
the
feeds
question
it
always
nougat.
is it Gizmo or is it a gremlin? And of course, it turns
Yeah.
out to be a gremlin, and it eats his cat.
No, but
so
it
horrific.
does it eat the cat in these 4 episodes
Yeah,
or
it
not?
eats the cat at the end
Okay.
of this.
That disturbed being cat people. My wife and I are like, damn it, why'd you have to do that?
I'm
I don't know
sorry.
why, but it still made me
No,
like.
I'm so sorry. Yeah, no, I understand completely. Yeah, we've seen a few
Justice
dead
for me
cats in this not in this series, but in this podcast. So yeah.
There's a Fantastic Fest. There's a dead cat, dead dog counter people have started adopting because it became such a weird trope. And humans, whatever, we know what we're doing, and we're part of the tropes. But when it's an animal, you're like, damn it. Like, why would you do that, you jerks?
No,
it's a huge, it's so much more impactful, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so, yeah, that was one of my things. But in general, like when you're talking about the pumpkin patch, by the way, for those of you who may or may not be playing the home game. So what we have is the town's covered up. The government's covered up all the weird stuff. A lot of people know, but they're keeping that under wraps. And all of a sudden, strange things start happening in the town again in an area where they think they've seen the last of all of this stuff, or at least they hope. And so pumpkins are rotting overnight and lying fallow, and all these weird fly gnat bugs are coming out of them. And then we're starting to see various things, whereas Will is being seen by Paul Reiser as his therapist psychiatrist, and we know there's things going on in the basement of the facility still that we were told would no longer be going on, and of course that's a lie. And they're also actively searching for 11, who they think might still be in the Upside Down, but they keep hearing rumors. So she's become legend among the scientists. So, which all of this, and it's put together really well. I think it's
that's a heck of a lot of plot. I mean, it's considering this is just 4 episodes we talked about. There's a lot.
And you have we're forgetting to mention the what did we call him, Jason? The guy from the X-Files guy. What's he called? What do you call the guys from X-Files that are always the dorky?
Talking about the lone gunman.
The lone gunman. Yeah, you've got this guy. You've got this guy. I'm looking for his name.
But he doesn't show
Murray
up till
Bauman.
Yeah,
Murray
but
Bauman,
doesn't he show up?
He's like
That's
this
in
private
6,
detective
right?
that Barb's parents have hired. What?
No, he's up in the front because he's talking. He's trying to get more time with the chief.
Yeah,
he's
but
like,
he's also throughout the whole thing because he's the guy that Barb's parents hired to look for her, and he's the one that the teenagers will eventually go visit to find out more stuff. And so, but he knows about 11, except he thinks that she was a Russian kid or something. Like he talks about how this Russian girl showed up, and so they all have, but because they've seen when she shows up. And this might be in episode 5 when we see this, but when she shows up to, and sees this family. So anyway, the point is that she's shown up, like you said. She's kind of a legend now, and there's these stories about what she's been doing.
Yeah, and he's the conspiracy theorist of the time. In the time before YouTube, he's that.
Oh, can you imagine his YouTube channel? His YouTube channel would be so great. I would watch it.
But yeah, he's living in again with the analog world. If you look at Kennedy conspiracy stuff that was around in the 70s, it'd be very similar to what this guy is doing. You're talking about ashcan stuff and newsletters that you're mimeographing and mailing around the country and
see, that's another thing. You say mimeograph, and immediately I can smell the ink.
Yeah.
The purple ink. Yep.
Yeah. And the problem, by the way, with being somebody like him is, it's very like being, an obsessive about anything, is that he's obsessed with this stuff, and that makes him unlikable to most people, because most people don't want to deal with, somebody who's really obsessed with something all the time.
Right.
So it makes you a little weird and a little bit of a recluse, and that's always been
and nothing
true.
you say is taken seriously. It's like the problem of Mel Gibson's character in that movie where he's a conspiracy theorist.
What was that called? I think that was called Conspiracy Theory. I'm not sure, but I think that's...
Conspiracy theory. That's probably right. And he basically everything is a conspiracy. Therefore, it's really hard to take him seriously when he actually. It's like it's not paranoia if they're actually out to get you.
Yes. Yes.
So yeah. Anyway, but we should probably wrap up.
I want to get to the one topic that I had left, which was the I'm going to say this. I'm going to say this, and then Drew, I know that you disagreed with me. You guys can all respond. But so I really enjoyed this. I loved watching it. But I am not crazy about this new universe we're in, where these wonderful new works of art come up. And the culture is kind of all about, let's consume it all in 12 hours and talk about it for a week and then sort of move on to something else. I liked the way that things used to be done, where I'm enjoying
but
the
you could
Orville,
still do that if you wanted to.
Exactly.
Right.
Also,
if you want to, I know plenty of people who ration stuff, Jason.
But you can't. No, Drew, I will say this: you can't do it and participate in pop culture, because if you get on Facebook, everybody's talking about it. If you get on talk shows, everybody's talking about it. So the understanding is you're the lone wolf that's out there who hasn't watched all of it at once, and you're kind of looked down upon, honestly, if you haven't. So if you decide you're going to try to
spoiled on Thor Ragnarok by the end of the weekend by people talking about it. That's life.
I'll be watching it this weekend because I don't want to be. I don't want to have to avoid people.
That's fine, but okay,
I don't like binge watching. I feel like it is unhealthy. Look, I know I do it. I'm just saying I feel like it's unhealthy. I feel like it's giving short shrift to art. I feel like it's weird.
How is it giving short shrift to art? How is it any different than reading something in paperback or watching something on VHS? In fact, I would say this goes back. The only thing you can conclusively prove is that it probably is bad for all of our waistlines, because it promotes being a couch potato. I can't really argue my way around that. But all of this is rooted in, I think this is the reason why this model came to be, because I remember being a kid and when Nick at Night finally hit being a thing, and they would have these marathons, and it would be 12 hours of Get Smart, 12 hours of Dobie Gillis, and I think that, we were taught that this was an enjoyable thing. But, I mean, you could even, I certainly, even before that happened, I had Star Wars marathons. I would watch all 3 Star Wars movies back to back.
Wait, we're talking to Jason and Tony, who have sat through, and you have too, I'm sure, year after year of 24-hour movie marathons at Alamo. So you can't tell me
Absolutely.
that you don't think that
No,
that's a
but
worthwhile thing to
okay,
do.
and to some
Oh
extent,
no,
I
I do
am.
think it's a worthwhile thing.
No, I'm talking about Jason. I'm saying
I'm
Jason's
I'm
being hypocritical if
conflating
he
the
says
problem.
it's not.
I haven't completely put this together in my head. I just know there is something here I'm not happy about that is difficult for me to put my finger
Get
on.
off.
But
You
one
want the
of them
kids to
is
get off your lawn. We realize.
Yeah.
We get
no,
it.
Okay.
that's
So
not the case. There was this wonderful comment this summer at Comic-Con where this guy said the difficulty of making Star Trek today is that you couldn't make City on the Edge of Forever because the next 3 or 4 episodes would have to be about Kirk getting over the death of Joan Crawford. And there was a great benefit to back in
That's
the day when you had.
serialized television, though. That's not binge watching. Those
This
are
is
two
true
different
enough,
things.
but wouldn't you agree that those two, for whatever reason, I'm not sure why, but they go together, hand in hand. You know
Yes, but I prefer
that's
the sophistication of modern TV. Like some shows do really good standalone episodes, and that's great. Like there's a lot of standalone X-Files, and honestly, like I could give a shit about the
yeah.
mythology episodes of the X-Files.
I'm
I
with you.
love the
I
Monster
don't
of the
like
Week
the
week
mythology
ones,
episode. Yeah, no, I'm totally with you
but
on that.
Whereas
I
I
like.
only
I
like the
think
mythology episodes.
I'm with Julia.
But I think around the time where we started to see shows like Buffy and we started to see shows like The Sopranos that had these very sophisticated,
Yeah.
and I'm going to use this, sophisticated character development that would happen with their characters. Like, you're not going to get that with a show that's basically every episode is the first episode. And I'm not saying there isn't merit to what you're talking about,
Yeah.
but I think the increased amount of serialized storytelling and character development that we are now seeing is one of the reasons why TV is in its second golden age and why it is kicking the crap out of movies. I mean, TV
Well,
is so much
and
better.
we have often said when we watched a movie that we think it would be a much better 7-hour miniseries. So clearly, I have a love for the 7-hour miniseries, right? For sure,
It's no
doubt about it.
accident that this is called Stranger Things too. Like they obviously
Yeah.
viewed this as more of a sequel than a second season of television. And I think
Yeah.
that now that this Pandora's, I mean, to me this is no different. Like the comic book industry is slowly but surely moving more towards paperback format. You know, and I know that there's a lot of people who prefer reading comics and trade paperbacks. But there are still single issue comics for those who prefer that. But I don't think you're giving to say that your people are giving like
No,
art,
when I
the
say
short
short shrift, I mean for me, if I'm watching a television series for 6 hours, there is no way that I'm getting I believe this is what I'm going to say this. If I spread this out and watched an episode every week the way that we did with Westworld, where a new episode came up on HBO and then you had to wait for the following Sunday for the new episode, you spent all week going, "Wow, what the hell was that? And what went on with that?" If I had watched all of it in 6 hours, I just feel like my enjoyment of it would not have been as strong
but I
because
think that's
it
personal
wouldn't.
taste.
It may
I
well
don't
be,
think that that's
but right now my personal taste is definitely the unpopular way to consume this
and that's
material.
fine. I'm not saying that that's wrong, but this isn't an issue of Jason is right and everybody else on the planet is wrong.
No,
Because
but I mean there
there
are
is
many
no
of
right or
those.
wrong.
So that's
There is no right or wrong about this.
I suppose
But
you're right.
I
mean, but
personally prefer like I watched Penny Dreadful both ways, by the way, and that was an extremely, that show was not as successful as it should have been. I think if it had been something that was on Netflix, it would still be on. But I get what you're talking about though, like being able to like analyze the hell out of the one episode and wonder about what was coming, and that's certainly the way I watched Buffy. But then again, I would always go back and buy it on DVD and marathon the entire season as soon as it came out.
Yeah, no, I know. I that's true. Go ahead, Tony. Yeah.
So there's a few things. I think it's quaint that you think everything is disposable and nobody, or else we wouldn't still care about Barb. So it's been close to a year. So like this idea of like everything's throwaway, I think a lot of things are, and that I lament. B, here's the deal. You talk about like, if we're participating. So we have this show, we have this podcast where we all grew up as monster kids. We all grew up as basically the kids in this show, particularly. during when it was not cool to like Doctor Who, when it was not cool to like metal, when it was not cool to like D&D, all of these things. And now, as an adult, the most freeing part of your life, you're worried about if people think that you not liking binge watching is popular. Fuck all those people. Like, you're an adult. You can watch things once a month if you want. Or you can watch Westworld, or you can, and if anybody's like, I don't see how you don't binge watch, you can give them the middle finger and go, well, I think that the way you binge watch is flat out ridiculous. Like, none of, like, if you feel like, now the spoilers thing is stupid, but I've been pretty good about doing that. You can be as an iconoclast as you want or not. Like,
That's
you
a
don't
really,
have
that's
to
a really
do
valid point.
any of this. When you're I think what is strangely, it's odd to me, and maybe it's because I'm kind of lazy about certain things, like, is how much, like, you are really wrapped up in, like, I think this is destroying art and stuff like that, whereas I'm like, I don't give a crap. Like, I can watch it however I want to, and if somebody at work is like, I don't see how you don't binge watch, like, I don't watch people playing video games because I prefer playing them. Almost every monitor at my job has somebody doing a Let's Play or Minecraft or Overwatch, or any people who talk about video games. Like,
I don't understand that at all, by the way. I have no understanding of watching.
And that's
I think
cool.
we've
It's not my
established
thing.
one thing with this episode is so that we're all old.
I don't prefer
whatever. I can't help that. Anyway, what I'm saying is you have a freedom of being an adult to not have to give a crap about any of that. And if you know people who do give a crap and want to cast shade on you, they can fuck off. And I think, like, there's very little hand wringing, other than what I do hate when people are like, just spoilers, or if you meet the opposite where somebody's actually telling you, like, you don't watch this right. Who cares, man?
No, you're right. There's a thing that we've talked about a lot, and that you're, I think, very wisely reminding me of, is that you like what you like, right? If somebody wants to, I try not to diss what people watch. Like I say, I don't understand necessarily wanting to spend hours watching people play video games on YouTube, but if that's what you're into,
if you like it, cool. I pass by and I'm like, oh, that's neat. Or I'll see people playing a game that I played a kabillion times. And I'm like, oh man, level 5 is kind of a bitch. I remember, like, wanting to throw controllers.
I will throw something into it, though, is that the problem for Jason is that if I binge watch it and he doesn't, then he feels like we can't, like, I feel like I can't talk to him about it, and he feels like now I'm either holding it over him that he hasn't watched it yet, or he feels like he should have watched it because I did.
I do think the relationship politics. Yeah, the relationship politics of binge watching or not are entirely different.
Yes.
And,
I think some of my favorite afternoons, though, like, you bring up a good point. Like, one of the reasons I do enjoy it is like, I so rarely allow myself sloth on that level, and sloth is one of my favorite sins, and I usually accompany it with gluttony when I'm doing binge watching. So, like, it's a very leisurely fun day, especially if I can get Jamie involved. But
absolutely,
like, the flip side of that, what you're talking about, Julia, is that's why it's good to have shows that are just your show. Like, you could be watching, I'm sure there's tons of TV shows that Jason likes that you probably have no idea. Like, Jamie loves the hell out of BoJack Horseman. I tried watching it. I couldn't really, I thought it was amusing, but it didn't really hold my attention. Now it's something she watches by herself. She's probably watching it right now. Like, that's okay. Like, that's, I think, why I would never want to go back to the old model of TV, because now, like, I never want fucking cable again. Cable can kiss my ass. Like, I want to be able to watch what I want when I want. I don't want to have to wait through commercials. Like, I have Netflix and I have Hulu, and I'm never bored when I want to watch TV. And I think that's the way things are going to be. I don't think there's any going back. I think this is the new model for how we get TV.
I think that's true. I think that's where the future is going. I mean, we're not there yet. But
he's not. He's just saying he's not happy about that.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
You're
I didn't
saying
hear
you're
what you
just
said.
not happy about that. Anyway, on that note, we should probably move on to our final
Yes,
thoughts.
yeah.
And,
You're exactly right. We should get our final thoughts and then come
Did I
around
win
for
the argument?
endorsements.
Did I win?
Well, no, we ultimately decided that you like what you like.
Was it a draw? Was it a draw? Does that make it
It
a
was,
draw?
draw.
yeah. I guess
I
it
like
was.
this better when I thought I won. I never
I
win
think
against
actually, I
Jason.
mean, I suppose you won because the ultimate decision is that Jason is fretting for nothing, and that's okay. I mean, that's
I
perfectly
just
fine.
want to feel like I won because my parents didn't hug me enough.
I
I just
want
picture
to.
Jason's shaking his fist at the giant smoke monster in Stranger Things, and it just goes binge watching, and he's like staking his giant smoke like blackened spider monster. This is not the world. You're in the upside down.
What you don't know, Tony, is that it's not. He doesn't shake his fist. He does the thing that the Sims used to do. I don't know if they still do it, but the Sims do when they don't like something and they just look up at the sky with their hands open and they're like, ah.
But I like it. But it's so much more poetic if the giant, spider monster is.
I
Yep.
agree.
The way the kids do these days with their interwebs.
Yeah. I don't know what to tell you. I mean, in fact, yeah. This conversation could be an entire panel on its own. Honestly, I think
We're
there's a lot.
gonna have this debate staged live at Anime Fest next year.
Oh, that sounds amazing. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, let's get our final thoughts. I think it went, it was Julia, was it Julia, Drew, Tony, and then me? Or, hang on, let's find it. It was Julia, Drew, Tony, and me. Yes, Julia. Final thoughts, for the first half. We'll be back next week. Stranger Things 2.
I already said most of my thoughts, but I just want to reiterate that what we said about the kid who plays Will just being fantastic and how heartbreaking it is that he's going through what he's going through, and then of course we'll set up for next half, or a little more than a half, is going to be his incredibly intense connection with and possession by the smoke monster, the shadow monster, as they call it. I wish they would call it smoke monster. I don't like that they call it a shadow monster when it appears to be made of smoke. But that's my own thing. But anyway, I think that's going to be fun to talk about because, I mean, gosh, it's so heartbreaking that he has to deal with all that and all the heat, the burning and all that stuff. But yeah, great conversation, great show. I'm excited to be doing this series.
Yes, excellent. Okay, Drew, final thoughts again for this week, because this is just pause and we'll be back next week.
Oh, I really did enjoy these episodes. I enjoyed the whole thing. I think this was a very lively discussion, so I'm glad that we took time to spread this out over 2 episodes, because I feel like when we tried to do the original Stranger Things all in one go, it ended up being a very chaotic discussion. I think this is nice and is orderly for us anyway. And
I have no
enjoyed
memory of that conversation, so yeah, go ahead.
It's a good episode, but there's a lot of bouncing around. Like this
Okay.
To me, I think was the right way to do it, and I enjoyed this discussion, and I enjoyed the episodes, and I look forward to talking about the last of it.
Excellent. Mr. Tony.
I really like the show. I like the tonal shift. At first, I was kind of didn't know exactly how it was going to be. They decided to not go with 11, with doing a whole thing where, do we get her from the upside down, etc. I thought that was an interesting take. Maxine, Mad Max, and her kind of fish out of water meets other fish out of water was really interesting. Again, I really like the music. I love what they do musically throughout the series, both in the score and the parts that are part of the 80s time period. I think are great. I really enjoy it, and I think there's a lot going on. I like the horror aspects of it, and as we discover kind of a little bit more of what the upside down is or might be, I think it's they kind of parcel it out interestingly. And we get this like Psychic Kids, almost X-Men / Anna to the Infinite Power thing going on, which I think is great. And although it made me, comic book fans may like this, you know what I wanted after seeing this is I want a Morlocks TV show. Totally not a thing that could happen probably, but it made me want it from the X-Men. I don't know. That's what I
Well, to be honest,
immediately.
I think the New Mutants TV series is going to be very close to what you're asking for.
Yeah, but it's not the Morlocks, which is what I want.
Yes. Yeah.
That's what I want. Anyway.
That's wonderful, Tony. Okay. I weep for the culture. But other than that, I love this show. I love what it's doing. I wish there were more of it. And that's a pretty good show when your main complaint is, God, I wish there were like twice, 3 times as much as this. So it's this is a really fun discussion. Let's come back next week to talk a little bit more about the plot, but mainly to keep talking about the themes that drive the show, because I think that's really the meat of the conversation in this show. So fantastic. Let's get endorsements. All right, Julia. I know it's been a busy week. I mean, I've been here. I've been watching you. We live in the same house. So do you have anything to endorse, or has it all been just sewing
My only
Halloween
endorsement
costumes?
will be Stranger Things related, which is there's 2 things. One is if you didn't catch Millie, what's her full name?
Millie Bobby Brown.
Millie Bobby
Just
Brown.
think of Bobby Brown.
Yeah, I know.
It's his
I don't want
prerogative.
to. I don't want to associate this adorable British kid with an abusive, Anyway, so she, if you didn't catch her on Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon, Google Millie Bobby Brown rapping the first season of The Stranger Things, because it's hysterical and adorable. She is just an amazing little rap artist, and I don't know if she wrote. I'm assuming she wrote it, but it's brilliant. But it's also just brilliantly performed, whether she wrote it or not. It's just a recap of the first season in rap. So that was super cute. And then the other thing is, when I was reading up on this, I was looking at the IMDb, and they have a really fun article called "Stranger Things Season 2 References and Easter Eggs." So it goes into some of the things that we already mentioned, some of the films that are, alluded to, but also just a whole bunch more homages and references that are in this. So it's, just IMDb, Stranger Things Season 2 References and Easter Eggs. But that's it. Like you said, I mean, this has been and parenting and Halloween and my actual career have kind of taken over. So I haven't had a lot of time to take in other media and what have you. But this has been really fun.
Drew.
It's not a perfect movie, but Darren, and it's a little past. It's Halloween themed, so it's a little past its due date. But if you're still wanting to hang on to Halloween a little bit longer, there is an Australian film called Boys in the Trees that's on Netflix, and it's mislabeled a horror film. It is a ghost story of sorts, but I don't know that I would call it particularly scary. But it is a very pretty movie, and it really captures the vibe of Halloween. It's actually, strangely, it is a period piece that takes place a decade after Stranger Things, because it takes place in Halloween during the 90s, and I think it does a good job of, even though it's set in Australia, I do think it does a good job of capturing a particular time. I can't speak to the place because I didn't live in Australia like ever, but it does do a good job of kind of recreating the 1990s and also capturing a very nostalgic kind of Halloween vibe. So if you want like a pretty sort of art house ghost movie to watch, I would recommend it. The other thing I would like to plug shamelessly is that my wife Jamie has her CD release party. If you live in Austin or will be in Austin on November 11th, go to the Indian Roller at 9 o'clock, she is going to be doing the EP release party for her new EP with her band Danger Cakes. It's called Gloomy Girl. That's already up on CD Baby and Spotify and probably iTunes and Amazon and YouTube and all that other stuff. But you can actually go there and buy a physical copy for those who prefer their music analog, and you can enjoy seeing Danger Cakes live. And they put on a hell of a show, and I think you'll have a good time.
We've said this before, but it is an amazing show to watch. Danger Cakes. We've really enjoyed it every time we've seen them.
Yeah.
Well, they just keep getting better and better and better, and they've done some interesting stuff on this EP, and they're a good time. So if you're in Austin on November 11th, go to Indian Roller at 9 o'clock and hang around for Danger Cakes. A band called Drew and the Internationals is opening. I am not in that band. It is a former member of Danger Cakes' band. Her name is Drew Hayes. We look nothing alike because she's a very tall blonde woman. But people keep seeing the poster and they're like, "Oh, did you start a band?" No, I did not. But it is a lady Drew. But then you can stick around after she's done playing and check out hours and hours of live Danger Cake. So be there or don't, but you probably should go.
Very, very cool. Tony, did you give us any? No. Lay it on us. What do you got?
I have a few things. Well, I think we talked probably enough about Rise from Fire at the beginning, but yeah, so after meeting in 96 through Musicians Wanted ad, my wife and I finally have an album together. We had a kind of dark wave.
And happy anniversary, by the way.
Thanks. Yeah, that was in 2000. So yeah, all this stuff. So we finally have an album together after all this time, which is super cool. And we hope to be hitting the road and promoting that and doing a lot. I'm still doing stuff with Deserts of Mars, but definitely Rise from Fire now has a thing out. And that's really cool and really kind of surreal, considering how long it is been in the making as far as just getting this together. So check it out, and thanks to everybody who has checked it out. I hope you dig it. Related to this podcast, I started playing a game called Party Hard, which is basically starts with a character who's decided he's going to kill everybody at each party. He's a serial killer because it's too loud or whatever. And there's even like an analog Leatherface / Jason with a chainsaw that you can be, and you go from party to party trying to kill everybody with traps, including golf carts and horses and stabbing and hiding bodies. It's kind of there's a few flaws. There's some bugs in the game I've discovered, but it really, if you wanted to get that kind of old school pixely version of what it would be like to be a Jason or a Leatherface, Party Hard does it pretty well with like an 80s soundtrack, and the save game is like an old insert disc like graphic and stuff like that. It's really cool. And finally, I just got in the mail after waiting a long time. Kodansha made this huge box set of Akira, the comic, the manga. It's hardcover. It's in a huge box. It comes in a box from Amazon. It says heavy, which it is. All 6 volumes, black and white, unflipped. Originally, how it was in Japan, they didn't replace any of the sound effects. And a book. It's a beautiful, beautiful box set. And I am looking forward to reading that. I haven't had time because of all the other stuff going on. But the Akira box set is really the thing I've been waiting on since the late 80s, early 90s when I discovered that this was a thing. So here we are in the future, full of awesome hardcover manga. So there you go.
One thing we haven't talked about at all in this is that the series that we're watching takes place in 1984, and of course there's a book called 1984 that gives you a little bit of a different picture of what 1984 might have looked like, but then it ended up looking like.
Well, we're kind of living in that future now.
Yeah.
Sure,
it only took. I have said for the past probably couple of years. It only took 30 years to catch up.
Right.
Basically, it was inevitable. They delayed it 30 years, but now here we are. Ta-da!
Yeah, our
All of
teenager
your
has been reading
devices watch
1984, and
everything.
she keeps talking about how much the current administration reminds her of Big Brother, and I'm like, no kidding, really?
Yeah.
But yeah,
There were tidbits when I first read it, full on, and Rain just read it recently, down to the internet's preoccupation with its own 5-minute hate. I think we've gotten it down from 5 minutes to like 3 or 4 seconds, or maybe like a minute or two,
Yeah.
within kind of blip fashion. But yeah, they're off by 30 years, but how could Orwell have known? I had hoped that it would stay an allegory, and yet here we are.
Okay. The first endorsement that I have is log rolling. I do have a short story that came out this week in an anthology. So there's a comic book series called Dead World that was around for a number of years, and it was about a bunch of kids in a school bus who were trying to make their way across a post-zombie apocalypse countryside dealing with zombies. And I've always been fascinated by the challenge of writing something in that universe, and so I contribute. There's a brand new anthology of short stories called a tribute anthology to Dead World, because Gary Reed, the very brilliant creator, died recently, and so they put together an anthology in his honor. And I wrote a story called The Guitar Girl, which was really my excuse to just tell a story about a girl who makes her living hitching rides between post-apocalyptic towns, playing like old Talking Head songs on acoustic guitar, and then moving on to the next town. So that's really what it is. It's so that's my story. It's the first short story I've done in years, and that came out just this week. So you Kindle or paperback or whatever you like. And I also wanted to recommend. I've been doing all this research on the Tiki book that I'm working on, and a big part of that has been watching old episodes of Hawaiian Eye. And I'm not going to promote Hawaiian Eye because I've talked about that before, but Warner Archive. I really believe that Warner Archive is a little overpriced. I mean, it's like I can't remember. It's somewhere between $8 and $10 a month, but it is the best. It is the only place really to get your hands on a lot of like really particular old Time Warner stuff, like Hawaiian Eye and Surfside 6 and 77 Sunset Strip and all that stuff. So if you're into that kind of nostalgia, which I know is very, very nichey, Warner Archive is a streaming service that is really killing it right now. So there we go. Gosh, I'm really excited. We made our way through the first half of Stranger Things, and I cannot wait to get together again next week to talk about the rest. This has been so fun. If you like the show, first of all, go to the Facebook page and like it, and then tell your friends, because we are this close to having 1,000 likes on the Facebook page, and I really want to close that gap. So if you can think of a friend who will like the show but hasn't liked the show on Facebook, just tell them to do it. Get it done. I want to cross that 1,000 barrier real soon, and I think we can do it. I think it's going to happen any day now. If you like the show, leave reviews on Facebook. I mean, on iTunes. This is hugely important because it helps people find the show. If you leave a review, we'll read it, and that's it. I'm super excited, and can't wait to talk about more stuff. So, all right, everybody, have a fantastic week, and I'll talk to you soon.
Good night, everybody.
night.
Good
Night.
night. Bye.